Some cases don't fall apart because of a confession. They fall apart because investigators refuse to stop asking questions. A timeline that doesn't quite fit, a story that changes, a piece of evidence that shouldn't exist. One by one, those small details transform an ordinary investigation into something far more disturbing. In this compilation, we'll examine 4 true crime cases where the moment investigators started asking questions, everything changed.
It began with a lie, a trembling voice on the phone, a worried stepmother, a missing child, and a story that didn't quite make sense. But no one, not the police, not the neighbors, not even his own father, could have imagined the truth that was hiding behind that front door. Because this wasn't a kidnapping, this wasn't a runaway, this was something far darker. From the outside, the house looked like any other. A quiet neighborhood, kids going to school, a family trying to build a life. Letecia had married into that life in 2015. She became a stepmother overnight, responsible for children who weren't biologically hers, but who depended on her all the same. She was educated, driven, confident. At least that's what people saw. But behind closed doors, things weren't so stable. She struggled to hold jobs. She clashed with people around her. She often felt unappreciated, overlooked, burdened. And slowly, quietly, resentment began to grow. Not loud, not obvious, just enough to fester. January 26th, 2020. It was supposed to be a normal day, a family outing, fresh air, photos, smiles. Nothing about that day hinted at what would come next. But that night, something small happened. A candle tipped over. Flames touched the carpet. A minor accident, the kind that most families would laugh off later. But not this one. Instead of comfort, there was anger. Instead of reassurance, there was pressure. A camera turned on. A child cried, and a voice, cold, sharp, told him he would have to pay for it. In that moment, something shifted. The line between discipline and cruelty began to blur. The next morning felt different, heavy, quiet. Gannon didn't go to school. He stayed home. No one saw what happened next, but the house remembered. Walls don't speak, but they hold stories. And later, investigators would uncover those stories. Blood on the walls, blood soaked deep into the mattress, blood seeping through layers of carpet into the concrete below. This wasn't an accident. This was violence. Something had happened inside that room, something prolonged, something desperate. A child had fought and lost. That evening, the call came. A report, a missing child. Her voice sounded concerned, confused, almost panicked. She said he had gone to a friend's house, but when asked simple questions, she hesitated. Names? She didn't know. Addresses? She couldn't say. Details? They changed. Still, the search began, because when a child disappears, you don't wait, you act. But while the world was searching outside, the truth remained hidden inside. The next day, something felt off. While others were organizing search efforts, she was making arrangements, renting vehicles, moving around, explaining things that didn't need explaining. Small inconsistencies. But investigations are built on small things. Why rent a car in the middle of a crisis? Why lie about where your own car is? Why focus on something so trivial when a child is missing? Each question added weight, and that weight began to tilt suspicion in one direction. When questioned, she talked, and talked, and talked. At first, it was one story. A man had come to fix the carpet. He attacked her. He took the boy. It sounded possible, until it didn't. There was no record of this man, no witness, no trace. So the story changed. Another man, another version, another explanation. Each one more elaborate than the last. But lies have a weakness. They grow. And the bigger they get, the harder they are to control. People can lie, but data doesn't. Inside her phone, a timeline was forming. Searches that painted a disturbing picture. How to clean blood, how to stop bleeding, how to remove stains, how to fake things. And then something even more chilling. Expressions of resentment, frustration, dislike toward the very child she claimed to love. It wasn't just evidence, it was motive.
Then came the footage. A neighbor's camera, silent, unbiased, unforgiving. It showed a simple sequence: a child getting into a vehicle, a woman driving away. Hours later, the vehicle returned, but the child did not. No struggle, no noise, just absence. And sometimes, absence says everything.
After that, she left. Not just the house, the state. Driving across miles and miles of highway. Hotels, stops, conversations. On the surface, it looked like escape, but in reality, it was disposal. There was a moment, a gap in time where everything changed. A remote location, a short stop, 12 minutes. That's all it took. 12 minutes to hide a truth that would take months to uncover. Weeks later, far from where it all began, a suitcase was found, abandoned, unremarkable, until it was opened. Inside was what no one ever wants to see. The missing boy. Not lost, not kidnapped, but taken. The injuries told a story no one could ignore. Violence, fear, desperation, and a final heartbreaking truth. He had tried to fight back. By then, the investigation had already closed in. The lies had unraveled. The evidence had aligned. And the story she told no longer mattered because the truth was louder. She was arrested, but even then she denied everything. Not a crack, not a confession, just more resistance, more deflection, more distance from reality. The trial came years later, delayed, complicated, watched by many. Her defense? She wasn't responsible. She wasn't herself. She claimed her mind had fractured, that another version of her had committed the crime. But the prosecution didn't argue emotions. They argued facts, actions, decisions, planning. Because what happened after the crime mattered just as much as the crime itself. Cleaning, moving, hiding, lying. These weren't the actions of someone unaware. They were the actions of someone trying to get away with it. When the decision came, it was clear. Guilty on every count. The sentence ensured one thing: she would never walk free again. And in that courtroom, there was no victory, only silence. A child was gone, not because of fate, not because of strangers, but because of someone he trusted, someone who was supposed to protect him. And that is what made it unbearable. Not just the violence, but the betrayal. Evil doesn't always appear as something obvious. It doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it teaches. Sometimes it lives under the same roof. What turns a person into something capable of such cruelty isn't always one moment. It's the slow build of anger, resentment, and unchecked emotion. And when those things are left to grow, they don't just destroy lives, they erase them forever.
She smiled in court until the truth began to surface. She walked into the courtroom with a smile. At just 17 years old, Sarah Grace Patrick looked calm, composed, almost confident. To anyone watching, she didn't appear like someone facing multiple murder charges. In fact, she seemed convinced she would be going home soon. Her lawyers painted a familiar picture: a harmless teenager, a good student, a girl who couldn't possibly commit such a brutal crime. Her family supported that image. Her grandfather insisted there was no real evidence. Her father said she had never shown a single red flag. A pastor described her as faithful, kind, and deeply involved in church. For a moment, it seemed like the narrative was working, but then everything changed. At first glance, Sarah seemed to fit the image everyone expected: a grieving daughter trying to hold herself together after an unimaginable loss. She returned to school within days, stepping back into routine as if normal life could somehow soften the weight of what had happened. To her teachers, she appeared calm, quiet, and composed. But there was something about that composure that felt unusual. Too steady, too controlled. At her parents' memorial service, she stood before a room filled with grief and delivered a speech that was polished, articulate, and carefully measured. Her words were appropriate. Her tone was respectful. Everything sounded right. And yet, something felt missing. While others around her broke down in tears, struggling to even speak through their pain, Sarah remained steady. Her voice didn't crack. Her expression didn't falter. There were no visible signs of emotional collapse, no moment where grief seemed to overwhelm her. To some, this meant nothing. People process loss in different ways, they argued. Shock can numb emotions. Strength can look like silence. But to investigators, it raised questions, because sometimes it's not just what people show, it's what they don't. As they looked closer, that carefully constructed image of a grieving daughter began to feel less certain. Small inconsistencies started to emerge, subtle details that didn't quite align. And then they uncovered something that would change everything. Something that would begin to dismantle the story she had so carefully presented. Before and after the murders, Sarah had been active on social media, especially TikTok. Like many teenagers, she followed true crime content, but what she did next stunned even experienced investigators. She began messaging true crime creators, dozens of them. Her request: she wanted them to cover her parents' murder case. In one message, she wrote, "It's super interesting, and I think your audience would love it." Super interesting. Those were her words. To prosecutors, this wasn't grief. This was something else entirely. A calculated attempt to control the narrative, to shape public perception, to turn tragedy into content. Creators who received the messages were disturbed enough to report them to authorities. And that's when the case took a darker turn. When questioned, Sarah told police she had been asleep during the murders. She claimed she didn't hear anything, no gunshots, no disturbance. But then she mentioned something critical. She said she heard the alarm from her stepfather's LVAD device, a life-sustaining heart machine that emits a loud, escalating warning when something is wrong. She heard that alarm, but not the gunshots? That contradiction raised serious doubts, because LVAD alarms are designed to be impossible to ignore. They start loud and only get louder. If she heard that, how did she miss multiple gunshots in the same house? To investigators, the answer became increasingly clear. Authorities moved quickly to secure every piece of digital evidence: her phone, her computer, and any other devices she had access to. What they uncovered wasn't just routine data. It was a digital trail that began to paint a far more troubling picture. Search histories revealed patterns, questions that didn't seem random or innocent. They pointed toward a growing curiosity about crime, about how investigations work, and more disturbingly, about how people attempt to evade them. Messages told a similar story. Beneath everyday conversations were moments of frustration, subtle expressions of anger, and signs of deeper emotional tension, particularly toward her parents. Individually, each detail might have seemed insignificant, but together, they formed something much more powerful. There were traces of intent, searches about forensic evidence, about what police can and cannot track, about how crimes are analyzed after the fact. These weren't the kinds of questions asked out of simple curiosity. To investigators, they suggested preparation, awareness, even calculation. Piece by piece, the narrative began to shift. This no longer looked like a sudden act driven by emotion or impulse. It began to resemble something far more deliberate, something thought through in advance. And with every new discovery, that possibility became harder to ignore. Sarah once again appeared confident. Her defense team brought forward witnesses, teachers, friends, guardians, all describing her as kind, respectful, and normal, someone who didn't belong behind bars. For a moment, it seemed like the court might be convinced. Then the prosecution called their witness. James Brock's sister took the stand. Through tears, she described the unimaginable pain of losing her brother. She spoke about the trauma inflicted on the children, especially the 5-year-old who found the bodies. She didn't ask for sympathy. She asked for protection. She begged the judge, "Do not let Sarah go." Then came a statement from a 12-year-old boy, James's son. He spoke about trust, about love, about betrayal. Why would she do this? The courtroom fell silent, and for the first time, Sarah's smile disappeared. After hearing both sides, the judge made his ruling. Sarah Grace Patrick would not be granted bond. She would remain in jail until trial. The charges were severe: multiple counts of murder, aggravated assault, and firearm possession during a felony. To the court, she was not just a teenager. She was a potential danger. Conclusion: more than just a true crime headline. This case is more than just another true crime headline. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How well do we really know the people closest to us? Can someone appear completely normal while hiding something much darker beneath the surface? And in a world shaped by social media, how easily can reality be manipulated? If the allegations are true, this wasn't just a crime. It was a calculated act followed by an attempt to control the story that came after. This story reminds us that actions after a tragedy can reveal just as much as the tragedy itself. Grief has no single face, but neither does deception. In the end, truth isn't shaped by appearances, emotions, or carefully crafted narratives. It's revealed through evidence, consistency, and time. And sometimes, the most chilling part of a story isn't what people do, it's how calmly they believed they'll get away with it.
If you search Nicole Callahan's name online before the investigation became public, you would not find fear. You would find admiration. Old Facebook comments described her as an inspiration. Former students thanked her for believing in them when nobody else did. Parents called her patient, creative, and devoted to children. At Homeland Park Primary School in Anderson County, South Carolina, Nicole was known as the energetic kindergarten teacher who stayed late to help struggling students. At Project Challenge Playhouse, she became the passionate theater director who helped shy teenagers gain confidence under stage lights. To many families, she represented safety. That is what makes this story so disturbing. Because according to investigators, behind the image of a trusted educator was someone accused of systematically grooming a teenage boy for years while hiding in plain sight. And perhaps the most uncomfortable part of all is this. Many of the warning signs were visible long before anyone called the police. They were simply interpreted differently because Nicole Callahan was a woman. For years, society has conditioned people to imagine predators in a very specific way: older man, young girl, authority figure, abusing power. But the allegations against Nicole forced many people to confront a reality they were not emotionally prepared to discuss. What happens when the trusted teacher is female? What happens when the victim is a teenage boy? And what happens when society mistakes manipulation for kindness simply because it comes wrapped in a nurturing personality? Those questions now sit at the center of one of South Carolina's most controversial criminal investigations. According to prosecutors, Nicole first met Grant Strickland in 2021 during auditions for a production of Legally Blonde at Project Challenge Playhouse. Grant was only 14 years old. Friends described him as quiet and socially awkward. Theater became the first place where he truly felt accepted. Nicole quickly recognized that vulnerability.
At first, everything appeared normal. Parents saw a dedicated mentor helping a teenager discover confidence. Nicole offered extra coaching sessions. She volunteered rides. She stayed involved in his daily life. She became available whenever the family needed help. And slowly, prosecutors argue, those gestures transformed into something much darker. Investigators later described the relationship as a textbook pattern of grooming. Not sudden, not reckless, but gradual, emotional, and highly calculated. The process allegedly began with access. Nicole reportedly signed Grant out of school repeatedly for theater-related activities. She drove him to rehearsals. She arranged private time together through programs parents trusted completely. To outsiders, it looked responsible. To investigators, it looked strategic. Because grooming rarely begins with obvious criminal behavior. It often begins with dependency. A teenager starts believing one adult understands them better than anyone else. The adult becomes mentor, protector, emotional support system, and eventually gatekeeper of affection itself. And according to prosecutors, Nicole carefully built that position over time. One recovered message later became especially chilling to investigators. Nicole allegedly described herself as a very good actress, adding that those skills were useful. That statement mattered because prosecutors believe Nicole was not only manipulating a child, she was manipulating the entire environment around him. As her relationship with Grant deepened, Nicole reportedly shared stories about her failing marriage, family stress, and emotional struggles. Grant's mother began sympathizing with her. The family trusted her more deeply. Nicole stopped feeling like an outside authority figure and slowly became emotionally embedded within the household itself. That emotional integration created confusion. Boundaries became blurry. The relationship stopped looking professional long before many adults around them realized something was wrong. And prosecutors argue Nicole understood exactly how to use that confusion to her advantage. The case has also raised uncomfortable questions about gender bias. Many observers pointed out that if a 3-year-old male teacher had repeatedly isolated a 4-year-old girl, signed her out of school, driven her alone to private rehearsals, and maintained secret contact outside school hours, concerns likely would have emerged far earlier. But Nicole was a woman, and Grant was a boy. That combination created what some experts describe as a blind spot of suspicion. Even after warning signs appeared, many people struggled to interpret Grant as a victim. That reality became painfully clear later when Grant publicly stated, "I wasn't a man, I was a boy." The sentence spread rapidly online because it challenged one of society's oldest misconceptions about abuse involving male victims. Too often, teenage boys are expected to interpret exploitation as experience. They are told they should feel lucky. They are taught that emotional damage somehow matters less when the offender is female. Grant rejected that narrative publicly. He described confusion, depression, emotional dependency, and the feeling of losing part of his childhood before he was emotionally mature enough to understand what was happening. According to investigators, Nicole's control allegedly extended far beyond emotional attachment. When Grant's family eventually attempted to cut contact, prosecutors say Nicole adapted immediately. She allegedly purchased an Xbox specifically to continue secret communication with him online. The move shocked many people because it demonstrated persistence. The communication did not stop simply because boundaries were requested. Police later recovered approximately 12,000 messages from seized devices. 12,000. Investigators argue that number alone reveals the scale of the alleged manipulation. The messages reportedly included inside jokes, emotional language, pet names, and ongoing conversations maintained over years. But prosecutors also allege Nicole introduced Grant to alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana while they were alone together. Authorities believe those substances were not random recreational behavior. They allegedly became tools designed to weaken boundaries and normalize secrecy. Experts who study grooming patterns often describe this tactic as accelerated adulthood. A child is slowly pulled into adult behavior before they possess the emotional maturity to process the consequences. That distortion can create long-term confusion about consent, identity, and responsibility. And according to prosecutors, the effects on Grant became increasingly visible over time. School performance reportedly declined. Behavior changed. Family concerns intensified. Yet, despite those warning signs, adults and institutions allegedly failed to intervene effectively. That failure now sits at the center of multiple civil lawsuits connected to the case. Grant Strickland later filed lawsuits involving Anderson School District 5, Project Challenge Playhouse, and the Governor's School for the Arts and Humanities. One of the most alarming allegations concerns how Nicole allegedly checked Grant out of the Governor's School dormitory despite not being a legal guardian. Critics immediately asked, how could that happen? Why were protocols not enforced? Why were so many unusual interactions normalized? The lawsuits argue that systemic failures allowed inappropriate access to continue far longer than it should have. And this is where the Nicole Callahan case expands beyond one individual accused of misconduct. It becomes a larger story about institutional trust. Schools, theater programs, churches, and mentorship organizations all depend heavily on emotional credibility. Communities survive because parents believe certain adults are safe around children. But cases like this expose how dangerous unchecked trust can become when accountability disappears. Some observers compared the investigation to other cases involving female educators accused of exploiting teenage boys, including the Laura Karen case in New Jersey. The details differ, but the underlying pattern remains disturbingly similar. Trusted women gaining emotional access to vulnerable boys, while surrounding adults struggle to interpret warning signs as dangerous. That comparison forced many parents to confront a painful realization. Predators do not always look frightening. Sometimes they look supportive. Sometimes they look compassionate. Sometimes they look exactly like the kind of mentor communities celebrate publicly. As the criminal investigation intensified, Nicole's public image began collapsing rapidly. She eventually resigned from her position. Authorities seized phones and digital records. Bond hearings revealed increasingly detailed timelines from prosecutors. Yet, even during court appearances, many people remained disturbed by Nicole's calm demeanor. Photographs showed her smiling, appearing composed, sometimes even confident. For critics, those moments symbolized emotional detachment from the damage prosecutors say she caused. Nicole's defense team emphasized that she had no prior criminal history. They argued she cooperated with investigators. They also revealed she was pregnant during the legal proceedings. But prosecutors argued none of those details erased the core allegations. Not the years of alleged manipulation, not the hidden communication, not the 12,000 recovered messages, and not the emotional impact described by Grant himself. Then, something unexpected happened. After Grant publicly shared his story, Safe Harbor, a nonprofit supporting abuse victims, reported a 38% increase in hotline calls from teenage boys in the region. Other boys were beginning to speak. That ripple effect may ultimately become one of the most important consequences of this entire case. Because beyond criminal charges and courtroom arguments, the Nicole Callahan investigation forced society into conversations many people have spent decades avoiding. Can female predators hide more easily behind trust? Do communities overlook warning signs when victims are boys? And how many children remain silent because they fear nobody will believe their pain? Today, Nicole Callahan faces 15 criminal charges across 2 counties while awaiting trial. Her teaching license has been suspended. Additional investigations remain ongoing. But regardless of how the legal process ultimately ends, one thing has already changed permanently. People are no longer looking at these cases the same way. And for many survivors who spent years believing their experiences would never be taken seriously, that shift may matter more than anything else.
She spent years warning the public about drunk driving. She stood beside police cruisers in official safety campaigns. She explained investigations to reporters. She represented professionalism, discipline, and trust inside the Washington State Patrol. But on the night of March 1st, 2025, Sarah Clayson became the exact type of person she once warned the public about. And what happened after the crash would force people across Washington to ask a terrifying question. What happens when the people trusted to enforce the law are the very ones accused of breaking it? Because this case was never just about alcohol, it became a story about privilege, protection, and the invisible power that can exist behind a police badge. At first glance, Sarah Clayson looked like the last person anyone would expect to face a DUI vehicular homicide charge. She was not a reckless teenager, not a repeat criminal, not someone unfamiliar with law enforcement. She was law enforcement. For 14 years, Clayson worked inside the Washington State Patrol. And more importantly, she served as a public information officer, a public face for the agency itself. That detail matters more than people realize. A PIO is trained to speak carefully, to control narratives, to remain calm under pressure, to understand how investigations work from the inside. Which means Sarah Clayson likely knew more about DUI investigations than most ordinary citizens ever will. She knew what officers look for. She knew how evidence is collected. She knew how field sobriety tests work. And according to prosecutors, she may have used that knowledge to her advantage after the crash. But long before Highway 240 became a crime scene, investigators say another story had already been unfolding behind closed doors. That story centered around a place called Moon Palace. Moon Palace did not resemble a normal neighborhood restaurant. Investigators later described it as secretive and unusual. The front entrance stayed locked. Customers often entered through the side door. The business operated mostly in cash. One officer even admitted he believed the building had been abandoned for years. But Sarah Clayson and her husband knew the place very well. Surveillance footage showed the couple arriving there on the afternoon of March 1st. They stayed nearly 4 hours before Sarah eventually got behind the wheel of her SUV. And investigators soon discovered this was not a one-time visit. During a search of the business, police recovered dozens of handwritten tabs connected to Sarah and her husband from previous months. The records allegedly showed a pattern. 3 to 5 visits every week, 4 to 6 strong drinks per visit, week after week, month after month. That discovery changed the public narrative surrounding the case. The defense wanted people to see Sarah as a respected officer who made one tragic mistake. But investigators began seeing something different, a dangerous habit hidden behind a trusted image. Then came the detail that shocked even experienced detectives. The receipt from the exact night of the crash had vanished. Not the receipts from February, not the receipts from January. Only March 1st was missing. When investigators arrived with a search warrant, the bar manager reportedly became defensive and uncooperative. Body camera footage captured tense exchanges between officers and staff while detectives searched for missing records. To prosecutors, the disappearance of that receipt did not feel random. It looked like someone may have been trying to protect Sarah Clayson. And if true, that possibility transformed the case from a DUI investigation into something far more disturbing, a potential culture of protection surrounding one of their own. Hours later, that protection would collide violently with reality on Highway 240. 20-year-old Jose Vega Sanchez had just finished work earlier that day. Family members described him as hardworking, respectful, and full of future plans. He was still learning how to ride his motorcycle. He had dreams of building a better life, but he never made it home. Around 7:30 that evening, Sarah Clayson attempted a left turn across oncoming traffic. Her SUV slammed directly into Jose's motorcycle. The collision was catastrophic. Jose was thrown across the roadway while his motorcycle became trapped underneath Sarah's vehicle. Witnesses rushed toward the scene. CPR began almost immediately. And then came one of the most disturbing allegations in the entire case. According to witness statements, Sarah's SUV appeared to restart and move slightly forward after the collision. Investigators believe she may have attempted to drive away, but the vehicle could not move because Jose's motorcycle was physically wedged underneath the SUV. That detail changed everything. Because a bad judgment call is one thing. Trying to leave the scene of a fatal collision is something very different. Prosecutors later argued the attempted movement suggested consciousness of guilt. In other words, they believed Sarah already knew she was intoxicated. And perhaps even more disturbing than the allegation itself was her demeanor afterward. Body camera footage showed Sarah speaking calmly with responding officers. At times, the interaction sounded less like a criminal investigation and more like colleagues speaking to another officer. She understood the process, and according to investigators, she knew exactly how to use it. When officers asked Sarah to perform field sobriety tests, she refused. When they requested a preliminary breath test, she refused again. Not emotionally, not aggressively, carefully, strategically. At one point, Sarah reportedly told officers, "I know how this process goes." To prosecutors, that statement sounded less like confusion and more like calculation. Every minute mattered, because every minute gave alcohol more time to leave her bloodstream. Still, investigators quickly noticed warning signs. Her eyes appeared glossy. Officers smelled alcohol. She misspelled the word sign as sigh. She incorrectly estimated critical distances at the crash scene. Individually, they may have seemed minor. Together, they painted a very different picture. Eventually, investigators obtained a warrant for a blood draw. But by then, 6 hours had already passed since the crash. And even after 6 hours, Sarah Clayson's blood alcohol concentration measured 0.17%, more than twice the legal limit. That number horrified the public, because toxicology experts understood what it implied. If her BAC was still 0.17 6 hours later, then at the moment of impact, it may have been close to, or even above, 0.20%. At that level, judgment becomes severely impaired. Reaction time slows dramatically. Decision-making collapses. Suddenly, the defense argument about a simple driving mistake became much harder to believe. This no longer looked like a momentary lapse in judgment. It looked like the predictable result of extreme intoxication. But for many observers, the most controversial part of the story was not what happened before the crash. It was what happened afterward. Months passed before formal charges were filed. Jose's family said communication from prosecutors was minimal. Public frustration continued growing. Meanwhile, Sarah Clayson remained free. She was released without bail. She was allowed to travel freely. She was not required to wear alcohol monitoring equipment. And according to reports, she continued receiving a salary exceeding $133,000 per year while on administrative leave. To critics, it looked like two justice systems operating side by side, one for ordinary citizens and another for people protected by the thin blue line. That perception fueled outrage far beyond Washington state, because this case exposed a painful contradiction inside modern policing. What happens when the very people trusted to uphold accountability are accused of avoiding it themselves? What happens when professional experience inside the justice system becomes a shield instead of a responsibility? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, if a police badge can delay suspicion, soften treatment, and buy valuable time after a deadly DUI crash, can it also delay justice itself? Jose Vega Sanchez lost his future on Highway 240. His family lost a son, a brother, a young man who never got the chance to finish becoming who he wanted to be. And now one question continues hanging over this entire case like a shadow. If Sarah Clayson had not worn the invisible protection of a badge behind her name, would the system have treated her the same way?